third reading.
Mr. Speaker, I call Paul Quinn. Mr. Speaker, I move that the Electoral Disqualification of Sentence Prisoners Amendment Bill be now read a third time. Mr. Speaker, we are in the final stages of considering this bill, and I have to say I have listened with care and intent to the arguments, or should I say lack of arguments, that have been passed around this House. And I think I can best sum up the opposition's contribution to the debate as being spurious rhetoric from the shrill rantings of Leanne Dalzell, Mr. Speaker, to the terminologically inexactitudes of Trevor Mallard, from the clamouring diatribe of Grant Robinson, the bellowing tirade of Clayton Cosgrove in the first reading. Sir, their contribution is, as I say, best summed up as a show of ineptitude. The starting point, Mr. Speaker, the starting point for consideration of this bill is the 1986 Royal Commission. And I want to quote from that commission when it says punishment for serious crimes properly involves the forfeiture of the right to vote. Unfortunately, it then undersold itself by suggesting that people actually go to prison for misdemeanours. And the truth of the matter is that this goes to the nub of the issue. People do not go to prison for misdemeanours. It's as simple as that. I noticed the Attorney General said in his regulations review report, which I might say we actually do, Mr. Speaker, come without fear or favour, we actually do. And in his report, he said people may go to prison for not paying a fine. May go to prison without paying a fine, for not paying a fine. The fact, Mr. Speaker, is that it is only serial fine defaulters that go to prison. And I want to quote from the then Minister of Corrections, the Honourable Rick Barker, who in answer to an oral question in the previous administration when he was asked about this matter said, and I quote, "A decision to sentence a fine defaulter to a custodial sentence is one made by a judge when he or she is satisfied all other methods of enforcing the fines have been ineffective." I see the member from Rumataka across the aisle. Only last month in the Upper Hutt Court, Donnie Cleburne was, after numerous opportunities for having 42,000 in unpaid fines, snubbing another opportunity to work it off in 160 hours of community, was finally remanded. 42,000 of unpaid fines. How long that may have taken him, and that is a classic example of what the previous Minister of Corrections was referring to. There's any number of laws on our statute book whereby people can go to prison, and of course people can go to prison for swearing under a 1920s Act. They can. Has anyone been to prison for swearing? No. One person was charged. one person was charged in about 1929 and, in fact, never went anywhere. I say to the opposition, live in the real world. The difference, Mr. Speaker, between this side of the House and that side of the House is that we are prepared to deal with reality and, in fact, not mould reality to fit a purpose. The reality, the truth, is that people only go to prison for serious crimes. Over 70% of all inmates have at least 10 convictions before they serve their first term. And I know the opposition don't like talking about real examples because they don't like the reality, but let's just talk about some. I refer to Richard Rowe. 20 previous drink driving convictions before receiving a first custodial sentence of 16 months. Alison Downer, 3 previous drink driving convictions before killing a cyclist, Mr. Speaker, on her 4th conviction. Harley Mackenzie specialised in torturing animals. After having been convicted of numerous acts of cruelty against animals, he was finally given a custodial sentence of 4 months for beating to near death a protected seal. And this followed an incident 3 months earlier in which he cut off the ears and tail of a pig. Isaiah Ty, notwithstanding that Justice Potter called, and I quote, unprovoked, gratuitous violence, unquote, was sentenced to 2 years, 10 months for the manslaughter of Hawea Verco. And under the current law, he would be able to vote. And I say that's a scourge on this society, and it's an outrage. So I say to my colleagues, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that this bill will right the justice and outrage that has occurred since 1996 when the long-standing agreement, and I know that the Green Party will quote other jurisdictions, which I've already commented on, and I find ironic that they spend most of their life in here telling us about the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we should actually do our own thing. That was their argument in The Hobbit. Let's be world leaders. Let's be at the front of the pack. But here, because it suits, they quote, in fact, other jurisdictions and say we're way out of kilter. Well, I'll tell them that the 2 biggest democracies in the world do not allow their prisoners to vote. The 2 biggest. And, in fact, Britain, which has always been of that, and which, I might add, as Mr. Robinson knows, have the overwhelming majority of the British people are against prison, have had to change simply because the EC has forced them to do so, otherwise they would face fines. I want to thank my colleagues on this side of the House, my own colleagues in the National Party for supporting me in bringing justice. I want to thank my other government colleagues in the ACT Party for supporting me. And notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the wailings of the taxpayer-funded boffins that closet themselves in our ivory towers, and the whimperings of the Chardonnay socialists that masquerade as independent advisers, Mr. Speaker, the passing of this bill is a triumph for the overwhelming majority of New Zealanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, the question